Ever wondered how the most expensive military machine in history can lose to a balloon? Or how America once fought a tree using fighter jets and chainsaws? This isn't a parody. This is real US military history, filled with glorious faceplants, billion-dollar disasters, and enough tactical nonsense to fill a Pentagon-sized blooper reel. From generals who surrendered before the fight to secret missions that bombed themselves. These are the 33 dumbest, weirdest, and most absurd military blunders in US history. And yes, someone signed off on all of them. 1. Imagine this. World War I. America needs more ships, fast. The solution from the brilliant minds in charge? Concrete ships. Yes, you heard that right. Vessels made of reinforced concrete because steel was scarce. They actually built a dozen of these floating miracles of modern engineering, like the SS Atlantis. Predictably, these stone boats were heavy, slow, prone to cracking, and generally about as seaworthy as a bathtub full of anvils. Most had careers shorter than a TikTok trend, often ending up as breakwaters or artificial reefs, proving that while you can make a boat out of concrete, it doesn't mean you should. It's like trying to win the Indy 500 in a cinder block. The ocean probably just looked at them and went, "Seriously? You're bringing that to a wave fight?" Pure waterlogged genius. 2. In 1956, a target drone went rogue over California, and the Air Force responded with calm precision. 2 jets, 208 rockets, and an all-out assault on innocent trees, power lines, and 1 unfortunate pickup truck. The drone. Untouched. It just floated off like a smug plastic bag in the wind. Meanwhile, Palmdale residents were treated to America's first self-inflicted airstrike. The incident was labeled a training event. Yeah, if the goal was to train civilians to duck. Fun fact, this is the only air combat scenario where the drone didn't even notice it was in a fight. 3. The year is 1916. Pancho Villa, the Mexican revolutionary, just raided Columbus, New Mexico. President Wilson is mad. He sends General Blackjack Pershing and 10,000 U.S. troops on the punitive expedition into Mexico to catch Villa. For nearly a year, this mighty American army, complete with airplanes and motorized vehicles, a novelty, chased Villa's ghost through the rugged Mexican terrain. Did they catch him? Nope, not even close. Villa knew the land like the back of his hand and ran circles around them. The U.S. Army mostly succeeded in annoying the Mexican government, getting into a few accidental skirmishes with Mexican federal troops, and proving that sometimes, even with overwhelming force, you can't catch a clever fox in his own den. It was a multi-million-dollar game of hide-and-seek, where the seeker was blindfolded and the hider was Pancho Villa. He probably sent them postcards. 4. During World War II, the U.S. seriously built pigeon-guided missiles. Actual pigeons, in bombs, trained to peck pictures mid-flight to steer toward enemy ships. And get this, it worked. The pigeons nailed targets like feathery little psychopaths. But the brass pulled the plug, not because it failed, but because no one wanted to tell Congress their next war hero was named Mr. Beakface. Imagine generals discussing strategy with a coup. "Gentlemen, we go at dawn," assuming Larry the Pigeon gets a good night's sleep. You can't make this up, but we did, and paid for it. 5. Operation Washtub, 1954, Nicaragua. The CIA, in its infinite wisdom, needed to plant some Soviet-made weapons in Nicaragua to prove Soviet interference and justify overthrowing the leftist Nicaraguan government. So they hatched a plan to drop a cache of arms from a plane, making it look like a Soviet delivery. One small problem: they couldn't actually get any Soviet weapons. So what did these masterminds of espionage do? They bought some old, beat-up rifles from a surplus store, stamped them with fake Soviet markings, badly by all accounts, and then failed to even drop them correctly. The weapons were discovered, the ruse was immediately obvious, and the whole thing became a laughingstock. It was like a terrible spy movie parody, except it was real, and taxpayer money paid for the fake hammer and sickles. The local wildlife probably had a better understanding of covert ops. 6. In the 1850s, the U.S. Army said, "You know what we need in Texas? Camels." Because nothing says tactical genius like importing giant, angry, spitting animals into the Wild West. Turns out, camels were terrible co-workers. They scared horses, spat on soldiers, broke gear, and absolutely refused to follow orders. Troops hated them. One officer described them as devil beasts in fur coats. The army gave up, sold them off, and some escaped into the wild. To this day, people in the Southwest still report sightings of rogue camels. Somewhere out there, Private Humps is still on patrol. 7. The M2 Bradley was meant to be a troop transport. Then someone added a cannon, then missiles, then more gear. It became a cursed transformer built by a committee on acid. Too weak to be a tank, too bulky to be a carrier, and too expensive to justify its existence, the Bradley became a $3 million disappointment on treads. It was like giving a toaster GPS, a machine gun, and a snorkel. It did everything badly. HBO even made a comedy about how dumb it was. The Bradley didn't just fail, it failed so hard it got a movie deal. 8. In 1943, the US invaded Kiska Island in Alaska, ready to fight Japanese troops. Thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches, locked, loaded, and hyped for battle. But there was one tiny problem. The enemy had left 2 weeks earlier. Nobody told them. 0 Japanese. But we still lost over 300 men to friendly fire, landmines, and hypothermia. We literally fought seagulls and weather, and still took L's. And the best part? It was labeled a victory. Imagine playing dodgeball alone, getting hit in the face by your own ball and declaring yourself the winner. That's Kiska. 9. In 1943, the Navy commissioned a destroyer named the USS William D. Porter, and it quickly became the Mr. Bean of warships. On its first mission, escorting President Roosevelt, it accidentally launched a live torpedo at his battleship. Great start. After chaotic panic and desperate radio screaming, the torpedo missed. Barely. Later, they dropped depth charges on themselves, blew a hole in their own hull, and mistakenly fired at friendly ships. The crew was so accident-prone, other ships avoided them like they had scurvy. Eventually, the ship sank, not in glory, but after a kamikaze hit their own ammo stash. Honestly, it's a miracle they didn't accidentally sink the Atlantic. 10. In 1961, the CIA organized the Bay of Pigs invasion, a top-secret plan to invade Cuba with poorly trained exiles, zero air cover, and massive overconfidence. The result? A televised disaster. The whole world watched as Castro's forces wiped the beach with the invaders in 3 days. The plan had more holes than a block of Swiss cheese. Everything went wrong. The boats were late, the radios didn't work, and US denial made it all worse. It was supposed to be a swift regime change. Instead, it turned into a world-class embarrassment with a body count. Imagine trying to sneak into a party and tripping over the cake. 11. In 1980, the US launched Operation Eagleclaw to rescue American hostages in Iran. It involved helicopters, refueling planes, special ops, desert landings. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. A sandstorm knocked out visibility. Multiple helicopters broke down. Then a chopper collided with a transport plane during refueling, creating a fireball that killed 8 servicemen. The mission was canceled on the spot, leaving burned wreckage and credibility scattered across the desert. The rescue attempt never even reached Tehran. It was like trying to save someone from a burning house and setting your own garage on fire instead. 12. Between 1965 and 1967, US troops in Vietnam were issued shiny new M16 rifles. They jammed. Constantly. In the jungle, during firefights. Turns out the army had changed the gunpowder formula, didn't tell the soldiers, and didn't include cleaning kits. Troops were left fighting with rifles that turned into metal sticks after a few shots. Letters home begged for weapons that actually worked. Soldiers started carrying enemy AK-47s because at least those didn't choke under pressure. It wasn't just a supply error. It was like sending troops into battle with Nerf guns and hoping for the best. 13. In 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incident gave the US a reason to escalate the Vietnam War. Problem is, the second attack that triggered it probably never happened. Sonar readings were misread. radar was confused, and nervous sailors thought shadows were enemy boats. Based on this, Congress passed a resolution that basically gave the president war powers on a silver platter. A whole war, justified by what might have been waves hitting the hull. It's the geopolitical equivalent of punching your neighbor because you dreamed they stole your sandwich. 14. The Pork Chop Hill of Rations. The Fort Lee Imitation Maple Syrup. Incident, 1951. During the Korean War, the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps at Fort Lee, Virginia, was tasked with developing palatable field rations. Someone had the brilliant idea to create imitation maple syrup for pancakes. Their first attempt, however, was reportedly so vile, so chemically offensive, that when tested on soldiers it induced widespread nausea and vomiting. It was less sweet breakfast treat and more culinary chemical warfare. The recipe was quickly, and one assumes with many apologies, scrapped. It's a shining example of how even the most mundane aspects of military logistics can go spectacularly, inevitably wrong. Imagine surviving enemy fire only to be taken out by your own breakfast. The horror, the syrupy horror. 15. The Sheridan light tank was designed for airborne forces and Vietnam combat. It was small, fast, and could technically swim. It also exploded. A lot. Its cannon fired missiles, which sometimes detonated inside the tank. Its armor could barely stop a sneeze. It was so fragile, troops had to brace for impact every time they fired the main gun. It was like strapping a bazooka to a soda can and calling it revolutionary. Soldiers didn't trust it, commanders hated it, and the only thing it consistently destroyed was morale. It did have one job, and it nailed it, being useless. 16. In 1861, during the first major battle of the Civil War at Bull Run, Washington, D.C.'s elite showed up with picnic baskets to watch. They expected a quick Union victory, followed by tea. Instead, they got cannon fire, mass confusion, and a chaotic retreat. As the Union Army broke ranks and ran, politicians and socialites sprinted alongside them, abandoning cheese plates and parasols alike. It was war meets theater, with actual casualties. Imagine watching your favorite team lose so badly, the fans get trampled by the players. Bull Run wasn't just a battle, it was the first military disaster with front-row seating. 17. During World War II, the U.S. military backed a project so insane it makes pigeon missiles look normal. It was called the Davy Crockett, a portable nuclear gun designed to fire mini nukes from a tripod. Sounds cool until you realize its blast radius was bigger than its firing range. That's right, if you actually used it, you'd nuke yourself. It was basically a tactical suicide cannon. Troops were supposed to run after firing it. Run. From a nuke. Scientists invented a weapon where the user had to ask, do I want to win this battle or live? The answer was neither. It was retired before it could accidentally erase Kansas. 18. In the early 1960s, U.S. military planners came up with the Strategic Hamlet program in Vietnam. The idea? Move rural Vietnamese civilians into fortified villages to isolate them from the Viet Cong. Sounds smart until you realize the villagers didn't want to move, hated being walled in, and ended up sympathizing with the very people the U.S. wanted to keep out. It was like trying to win hearts and minds by bulldozing homes and saying, "You're welcome." The program flopped hard, wasting millions and backfiring spectacularly. Turns out people don't like forced relocation. Who knew? 19. Get ready for a military idea so bonkers it makes cartoon villains look sensible. Project Orca. In the 1960s and 70s, the U.S. Navy, possibly after a very strange brainstorming session, explored weaponizing marine mammals. We're not talking cute dolphin shows. No, sir. This reportedly involved strapping explosive charges to actual whales or dolphins. The genius plan? Guide these majestic, now bomb-laden sea creatures towards enemy ships or subs, then kaboom! Instant, very messy, anti-submarine warfare. While specifics are understandably murky, the sheer, unadulterated madness of turning Flipper into a guided missile is a new peak of, did anyone think this through? Imagine the pitch. Okay, so Free Willy, but with C4. Thoughts? This wasn't just outside-the-box thinking. This was strapping the box to a cetacean and hoping for the best. 20. In the early 1950s, the US military decided to experiment with LSD. Not at parties, on soldiers. At the Edgewood Arsenal, troops were dosed with acid without consent to see if it could be used for mind control, interrogation, or just reasons. Some wandered off, some laughed for hours, others panicked. None became psychic war machines. One soldier thought he was a washing machine. Another tried to interrogate a plant. This went on for years before someone said, "Hey, maybe this is a bad idea?" The program quietly ended, but not before proving that drugs and nukes don't mix. 21. In 1812, General William Hull marched into Canada with a plan to take Detroit, scare the British, and become a national hero. Instead, he panicked, surrendered the entire fort without firing a shot, and handed over more than 2,000 troops. Why? Because a Native American leader, Tecumseh, pulled a brilliant bluff, marching his warriors in circles to look like a massive army. Hull totally fell for it. He was later court-martialed for cowardice, which is basically the 19th century version of being ratioed. Surrendering a city you already owned? That's next level L. 22. In 1864, Union forces dug a massive tunnel under Confederate lines outside Petersburg, filled it with explosives, and blew it sky high. The blast created a huge crater and threw enemy troops into chaos. So naturally, Union troops charged directly into the crater and got stuck. It became a death pit as Confederate soldiers regrouped and picked them off from the rim like they were playing duck hunt. The original plan was to go around the crater. But leadership changed last minute, because of course it did. It's the military version of, "Look what I did. Oh no, I stepped in it." 23. In 1876, General George Kusters spotted a massive Native American camp and thought, "I got this." He split his forces and charged with 200 men into a force of over 2,000 Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho warriors. It went exactly how you'd expect: total annihilation. Not a single soldier from Kusters' group survived. He wildly underestimated the enemy and overestimated himself. A classic combo meal of military arrogance. The event was dubbed Kusters' Last Stand, but honestly it was more like Kusters' sudden realization that math matters. 24. In 1921, the Battle of Blair Mountain saw 10,000 coal miners rise up against corrupt lawmen and hired guns. So what did the US do? They sent in federal troops, planes, and even dropped bombs on American workers on US soil. It was the largest labor uprising in US history, and the only time the military bombed its own citizens during peacetime. The government called it maintaining order. The rest of the country called it, "Wait, what the hell?" When your response to angry miners is deploy the Air Force, maybe it's time to rethink your conflict resolution skills. 25. During the Cold War, someone had a genius idea. Let's design a helicopter to hunt submarines. Thus, the Navy birthed the Bell HSL, an anti-sub chopper that shook like a washing machine full of bricks. It was so underpowered, it couldn't lift its own equipment. Pilots described flying it as wrestling a shopping cart full of chainsaws in midair. It vibrated violently, overheated constantly, and was about as stealthy as a chainsaw duel. They made over 100 of them. Know how many saw combat? 0. It was too loud to sneak, too heavy to fly, and too useless to fix. Basically, it was a $4 million paperweight with rotors. 26. During World War II, the US military, in a moment of what can only be described as peak mad scientist, seriously developed bat bombs. Yes, you read that correctly. The plan was to strap tiny incendiary bombs to literally millions of hibernating bats, drop them over Japanese cities from bombers, and then, as the bats awoke and roosted in buildings, they'd set everything ablaze. It sounds like a rejected Looney Tunes plot, but they actually spent millions and got it somewhat working. One test accidentally burned down a US Army airfield hangar and a general's car. Oops. The project was eventually shelved, mostly because the atomic bomb was deemed a slightly more efficient, if less corruptorine, way to end the war. Imagine the briefing. All right, men, our next weapon flies, squeaks, and poops guano. Questions? 27. In the early 1900s, President Teddy Roosevelt wanted to flex American muscle by sending the Great White Fleet, 16 gleaming battleships, on a world tour. It looked cool, sounded powerful, but had one problem. The ships were coal-powered and needed constant refueling. Guess who controlled most of the world's coal ports? The British. So this show of independence relied on politely begging for gas money every few days. The ships were majestic, yes, but as strategically terrifying as a parade float that needs snacks every hour. It was like trying to threaten someone while borrowing their charger. 28. In 1976, after North Korean soldiers killed 2 U.S. officers over a poplar tree in the DMZ, the U.S. responded with Operation Paul Bunyan. Hundreds of troops, helicopters, fighter jets, bombers, and warships were mobilized to cut down one tree. They even brought chainsaws. It was the most overcompensating landscaping mission in history. North Korea watched in silence, probably thinking, these people are insane. Which was the point? The tree came down. World War III did not start. And somewhere in Valhalla, a lumberjack cried tears of joy. 29. Picture this. You're a U.S. military scientist in World War II, and your mission is to develop a non-lethal weapon to demoralize enemy troops. What do you concoct? Something truly devious. Something that strikes at the very core of human dignity. You invent... Who, me? Yes, that was its actual code name. It was a chemical agent designed to smell overwhelmingly of fecal matter. The idea was to spray it on enemy officers to make them social pariahs amongst their own men, thereby destroying unit cohesion through extreme, weaponized BO and embarrassment. It was essentially a government-funded fart spray of mass destruction. While the concept is undeniably hilarious, the project was eventually dropped, possibly because someone realized that making the enemy smell bad wasn't quite as effective as, say, actual bullets. Or maybe they just couldn't get the smell out of the lab coats. 30. After Vietnam, the military had a genius idea: reuse old C-123 planes that had sprayed Agent Orange for cargo and medical transport. Totally fine, right? Nope. The planes were still coated in toxic residue. So crews flew missions, hauled supplies, and even carried patients while being marinated in dioxin. Years later, cancer clusters emerged among flight crews. The Air Force insisted the planes were safe. Translation: we forgot to clean the flying poison tanks. It's like serving meals off old pesticide sprayers and wondering why everyone's coughing. Science said don't. Bureaucracy said meh. 31. The year is 1859. The United States and Great Britain are locked in a tense standoff over the San Juan Islands, strategically located between Vancouver Island and the U.S. mainland. What sparked this international crisis that nearly led to war between two major powers? A pig. An American farmer shot a British-owned pig that was habitually raiding his potato patch. Tempers flared, troops were dispatched, warships converged. For weeks, hundreds of soldiers and multiple cannons faced off over a deceased swine. Cooler heads eventually prevailed, and the pig war ended with joint military occupation until arbitration. But not before this porcine powder keg demonstrated that sometimes the dumbest arguments can have the highest stakes. It was diplomacy at its most oinkful. 32. In 1979, a unit of the Maine Army National Guard was on a routine training exercise near the Canadian border. Their mission was simple: navigate through the dense woods. Unfortunately, their map-reading skills were apparently less elite soldier and more lost tourist. They got so turned around that they accidentally invaded Canada, stumbling into the tiny Quebec village of Saint-Zachary. The locals were, understandably, a bit surprised to see armed American soldiers emerging from the forest. There was no international incident, mostly just confusion and probably a few awkward apologies over coffee and poutine. The guardsmen were politely escorted back to their own country, presumably with new maps and a stern lecture about international borders. It was less shock and awe and more, oops, sorry, eh? 33. Okay, for our grand finale of military genius, let's talk about the time the US tried to weaponize the weather. Project Popeye, active during the Vietnam War, was a highly classified cloud seeding program. The brilliant idea? Extend the monsoon season over specific areas of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, making the supply routes muddy, impassable, and generally miserable for the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army. They flew hundreds of sorties, dumping silver iodide and lead iodide into clouds, chanting, "Make mud, not war," probably. Did it turn Vietnam into an impassable swamp that single-handedly won the war? Not quite. While some reports claimed localized success in increasing rainfall by up to 30%, its overall strategic impact was negligible, and it raised a storm of ethical and environmental concerns. It was like trying to stop an army with a super soaker, albeit a very expensive, classified super soaker. The enemy still got through, just a bit soggier. So we've seen balloons that outmaneuvered bullets, camels that broke the army, and nukes designed to kill the people firing them. The US military may be one of the most powerful in the world, but it's also one of the most creative when it comes to screwing things up. Now it's your turn. What's the single dumbest military decision in American history, and why do you think they actually did it? Drop your theory in the comments. The wilder, the better. Oh, and if you enjoyed watching the military trip over its own boots, hit that like, destroy that subscribe button, and get ready for more history so dumb it shouldn't be real.